How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel that's all about PlayStation. If you're subscribed, you already knew that, but if you're not subscribed, you should subscribe because I am this close. I was gonna say something I can't say, something's hair away from 200,000 subscribers, so be one of the people who pushes me over. I would greatly appreciate it. In today's video, I've got 3 topics to cover. The first one is that we now have even more hints that Sony is kind of shifting things away from the Steam Deck and towards their own handheld. Second on the list, you now have your cheapest opportunity to get pretty much unlimited storage in your PS5. And finally, we're going to talk about how even though your PS5 just became a PS2, it is once again no longer the best PS2. All right, let's talk about this first news story here. So if you didn't know, I know you know because you guys always comment about it, Sony's been releasing a lot of their first party games over on PC, the latest of those being Ghost of Tsushima's Director's Cut. And there was a big problem in the PC world when that happened because the launcher that they use kind of screws things up, especially in Ghost of Tsushima's Legends mode. If you want to play multiplayer on the Steam Deck, you basically have to have a way to dual boot Windows because Linux is blocked out from using the multiplayer because of the launcher. And that was really surprising considering that all of these releases before Ghost of Tsushima didn't require a launcher for their multiplayer to work. Like Helldivers 2, there was that whole thing where they said, hey, a few months after it came out, you're going to have to log into the PSN to play this game. People got pissed, even though you have to do that in every Microsoft game, so Sony removed that requirement. But also, before this happened, they were like really gung-ho about making sure everyone on the PC side of the fence knew when their games were going to be Steam Deck verified, which makes sense because when the Steam Deck came out, a lot of the benchmark games that were like showing off how powerful the Steam Deck was were the Sony games. Like God of War, for example, runs at pretty much the PS4 settings of the game at a hard lock 30 FPS, which is great. They also talked about a lot when the PC version of The Last of Us Part 1 came out, how it was Steam Deck verified. Like they advertised the hell out of the fact that it was Steam Deck verified at launch, which as someone who also has a Steam Deck channel and basically splits my time between the Steam Deck and the PS5, there is no reality in which that port should have A, been sold in the state it was in at all, but B, even now with all the patches that got it up to snuff and everything, it should not be Steam Deck verified. Even at the lowest settings, it drops to 19 FPS regularly, and if you're running at the lowest settings using FSR, all that stuff that you add on to like make the game run, it looks terrible. So I would never recommend playing The Last of Us Part 1 on the Steam Deck. But that's a relatively recent release. That's a huge marquee game. And now they're kind of going in the opposite direction. We had that situation with Ghost of Tsushima, and the Concord beta did not work on the Steam Deck. You had to dual boot Windows if you wanted to try it out. It actually runs pretty good. Like you could get a solid 30 to 40 FPS out of it, which if you didn't know, the benchmark that everyone goes for on the Steam Deck is 40 FPS because that's the sweet spot between 30 and 60. We've even seen that in PlayStation 5 games like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. They had the graphics plus mode or graphics performance mode that ran at 40 if you had a 120 hertz TV, and it looks awesome. So theoretically, you would assume that Sony would be working hard to get that launcher up and running on the Steam Deck or on Linux, but no, they're not doing anything. They're going down Microsoft's path of never letting the Xbox app work on the Steam Deck, and the only way you can play Microsoft games through the store if you have Game Pass on the Steam Deck is to stream them, which really sucks. And it looks like that's going to be the same situation going forward for Sony with the Steam Deck, which again, really sucks. But as someone who has both a Steam Deck and a PlayStation channel, I'm seeing something here that might be hinting towards Sony getting people ready to play these games on their own dedicated handheld, right? Like if you're someone who wants to get a handheld and you have an option to get a Sony one that can play your big PS5 library, or if you're looking at a Steam Deck, a console that can traditionally run pretty much every Sony first party release. I mean, even Ghost of Tsushima looks and runs really good in single player mode on the Steam Deck. You also can play every third party game. You can play Xbox games on Steam. You can emulate pretty much any console. I mean, even going up to the 360 and the PS3, all of that is emulatable in good quality on the Steam Deck. So Sony's probably looking at that and saying, well, we got to give people a reason to really want our handheld if they have a library on Steam. And the best way to do that, of course, is to give them a better experience on their handheld, which, I mean, even from a technical standpoint, I'm assuming that the Vita 2, Vita 3, PSP 3, whatever it's being called, will have better performance than the Steam Deck because it's coming out around the same time as the Steam Deck 2 is supposed to. But either way, I am expecting this Sony handheld that's being worked on right now to have better performance than the Steam Deck because it's going to come out allegedly in 2027. I think that little extra edge of being able to take your saves, play your games you already own on the PlayStation Store, and also play multiplayer and not have to worry about dual booting Windows or using a launcher, that would convince people to buy a PlayStation handheld over a Steam Deck, which is a decent marketing move for Sony and PlayStation fans, but for PC people, that's obviously not going to be a good situation. For me personally, it's a weird situation because I love the Steam Deck. It's my favorite handheld ever. It plays all of my favorite games from every generation. It looks awesome. I have the 1TB limited edition model that's black and orange, and if you guys can't tell, I love Halloween and everything related to Halloween, so having a console in that colorway is absolutely phenomenal. But like, I have so many more games on my PlayStation library than I do on Steam, and this PlayStation handheld that's eventually going to come out is going to run PS4 and PS5 games, which means saves will transfer through the cloud if you have a PS Plus subscription, and that's the biggest thing that stops me from buying Sony's releases on Steam. The only reason I bought Ghost of Tsushima's Director's Cut is because I wanted to see how their new launcher worked and their new overlay and everything like that. But if I didn't want to see that for a video, I would not have bought that game because I already have a completed save on the PlayStation 5 and Sony gives me no ability to transfer that save. And taking things even further, I know that they want to get more into PC, but if you want people to buy your dedicated handheld that plays your dedicated games, I could definitely see them keeping a feature like save transferring locked to that handheld, because for me, that determines where I buy the game. If I can transfer my save to a handheld from my PS5, that's the handheld I'm going to use for that game. If it's not a game where I would want to do that, like I'm fine playing it on my main gaming PC and having the saves transfer to my Steam Deck, I will go back to how I did things during the PS4 generation, where first party Sony stuff, bought it all on the PlayStation 5. Multiplayer stuff, mostly bought it on PC, especially if it was a shooter, because that's where all my friends were. Third party stuff, case by case basis. If it ran like crap on PS4, I generally bought it on PC because I've always been fortunate enough to have a strong PC. But like, if I could take those games on the go and have my saves transfer in the future, I think I would stick with the PlayStation handheld because I just love Sony tech, right? Like the Steam Deck, as amazing as it is, I'm a huge fanboy of it. It has a lot of fragility issues. I went through 2 of the original Steam Decks from very light drops. They destroyed the right bumper on both of them, ironically, waiting 2 to 3 weeks to get them fixed. My limited edition OLED model, every single one of those is getting a crack on the bottom. Like if you hold it sideways like this, like hamburger style, I guess, you can see the screw is too tight on the back plate and it causes a little crack. Like if you have a limited edition model like I do, check to see if you have it. Unfortunately, Valve doesn't sell a new back plate for the limited one, the transparent black back plates. So the only way to get it fixed would be for me to RMA it, and I don't want to be without my Steam Deck for 2 to 3 weeks. So yeah, it's like a really frustrating situation. Whereas contrasting that with Sony, I mean, I put my PSP through hell. I took that thing to my brother's baseball tournaments. I took it to my parents' house in Jackson when they were like building it up to flip it. And like, I don't know, like the screen got a little scratch. I took it to trips of Florida and everything, but that thing was a tank and you could switch the battery out. It was awesome. Same thing goes for my PS Vita. I took it on trips to Florida with my family all the time. I mean, that thing went everywhere with me, and my launch Vita still works. And my Vita 2000, I think it's on the shelf behind me. If it's not, it's in a drawer over there. I boot that thing up from time to time to play Symphony of the Night, and it still works just fine. So from a hardware reliability standpoint, that's another win on Sony's belt. There's another notch on Sony's belt to make me want to play there more. So yeah, if they are getting ready for a handheld, one thing I would assume they're going to do is make sure that that handheld has more features than the Steam Deck, because, you know, it's like a cool experience to buy a game on Steam and have your saves transfer and be able to take the game on the go. They're going to give their first party handheld a little bit of an edge. And while it sucks for my PC side of my heart, I kind of get where they're coming from. They got to make sure that people buy this thing so it doesn't end up like the PS Vita did, because that would be disastrous. Anyway, but that brings us to the second news story here, which is that you now have the opportunity to get basically unlimited storage for your PlayStation 5, but man, is it going to cost you. So when the PS5's extra SSD port was unlocked, basically the max of SSDs you could get with a heatsink went up to like 2 terabytes. And then around a couple years later, like I think it was the beginning of last year, Western Digital released a 4 terabyte drive and it was really expensive, but now they have an 8 terabyte drive that is $900. So basically for the cost of 2 PS5s, you could get 8 terabytes of storage in your console, which it's a lot. I think I could fill it with if I downloaded every game that I own on the PlayStation Network, but like if I downloaded every game that I want to play, I think maximum I'd take up like 3 terabytes. Like in my PC right now, I have a 1 1 terabyte internal drive, but then I have a 2 terabyte drive on top of that. And I get pretty close to filling both up, but there's still a little bit of wiggle room where if I want to play a big game like Call of Duty, I always make sure I have a couple extra 100 gigabytes left over. 8 terabytes, I would never run out of space. I just think a $900 though is absolutely insane. But the cool thing is we saw this happen with the 4 terabyte drive where it came out and it was for like an exuberantly high price, like very extortionate really how high it was. But then very quickly, like a couple months later, it went down in price to be about half the new price when they released it to begin with. So I would keep my eye on this 8 terabyte drive because while it seems expensive up front, you're basically future proofing yourself forever, because when the PS6 comes out, it will no doubt have another SSD drive just like the PS5 does. And you'll be able to take this drive and move it forward to your PS6 or even your PS5 Pro. Or if you make the jump over to PC gaming, you could just take the drive out, format it, put it in your PC's extra SSD slot, and then you've got an 8 terabyte drive. And I have no problem recommending WD Digital, WD Black drives because I had a 2 terabyte one that made it between 6 PCs before it finally crapped out. I just bought another one last week during the Prime Day pre-sale at Best Buy. But yeah, I don't know. So yeah, $900 is obviously pretty expensive and not really worth grabbing it for your PlayStation 5. And I'm not even bothering putting in affiliate links. So this is not like when I used to do affiliate links all the time for the 2 terabyte drives when everyone was looking for them. I'm just pointing this out because 8 terabytes is absolutely insane. But if this thing dropped to like 500 on a sale or something like that, I'm personally going to be very tempted to pick it up at the very least to put in my PC, because having that much storage and never having to worry about it is kind of like the dream, right? Like it would just be awesome to have all of the games that I want to play at any given time installed and to have to never worry about maxing out my storage. I mean, I could even record so much more gameplay that way and just store it forever and not have to worry about uploading it to Google Drive before I delete it from my PC. That would just be sick. Anyway, that brings us to the third news story of today's video, which is that your PS5 is no longer the best PS2. If you didn't know, there's a PC app that's like the de facto emulator for PS2 games called PCSX2. I can't believe I got through that. It usually takes me like 5 or 6 tries to get through those names of these emulators because they're all crazy, like PPSSPP, that one's always throw me off. Anyway, this one's been around for a very long time. Like I remember using it in high school and it hasn't really changed all that much, but they just released a 2.0 update for it that is honestly very phenomenal. So the first thing it adds, which is really awesome, is Dualshock 4 and Dualsense native support. So before, when you would connect your Dualsense or Dualshock 4, you'd have to remap the controllers yourselves or trick it into thinking it's like an Xbox 360 controller or something like that. But now that it natively supports those controllers, so you'll get the light bar features and everything like that. I don't think it'll support haptic feedback or adaptive triggers in the DualSense just because, you know, like there's no games on the PS2 that really could take advantage of that, but it would be cool to see something like that added in the future. And they've also added in a new grid style interface. So when you download a game and then install it into PCSX2, it'll add the game to the overall library and it'll immediately download like poster or box art for the game. So you can get a nice little layout of all your PS2 games, which I think is sweet. And then under the hood, they've added in a ton of new features. Like you can save per game profiles for video. You can save per game controller mapping setups. You can save per game settings, which is crazy that that wasn't there before, but it's cool that it is now. Honestly, like I like implicit conversions. I like that they went out of their way to make a new emulator for the PS5 to run PS2 games. But if I was Sony, I would go to these small teams who are making like PCSX2 and the PS3 emulator and now the PS4 emulator. I would hire them to do this stuff. Like honestly, give them a big salary because they're doing a great job making sure that PS2 games are not only preserved pretty much forever as long as you have the ISO files, but also they're presenting them in a much better light than Sony does. Like the way you're able to use AI generated textures in games like Gran Turismo 4, which is amazing, or play games on your big screen TV and have them natively upscaled and look awesome. Like that's more quality than you get out of the PS Plus premium games when you play the PS2 games on the PS5. So like I understand kind of why Sony wants to have their own internal teams build this stuff from scratch, but like I feel like they should just hire these teams and have them port over these emulators that already work on PC, because in this console generation especially, the PS5 is essentially a small gaming PC. Like it basically has all the same parts as a PC, and I'm like, I'd imagine that it wouldn't be too difficult to even get these things ported over, and if they did that, we would get stuff like PS3 emulation so much quicker than we are now. Like we know Sony's working on it, which is great, but like it's probably going to be a while before before we eventually see it. I would imagine maybe at the earliest by the end of the year, if they had just hired this team from the outset to help them get their emulator that they already have working, running on the PlayStation 5, everything could have been happening a whole lot sooner. But some positive praise I'll definitely throw PS Plus Premium's way. They've done a good job the past couple of months adding in not only a lot of PS2 games, but also a lot of great PSP games. Ratchet & Clank Size Matters is one of my all-time favorite PSP games. I rented it from Blockbuster and then I begged my mom to just buy it because you could do that back in the day. If you rented a game, you could just buy the copy, and she did, which was awesome. I think she probably overpaid for it because it was probably on sale for 20 bucks by that point, but that was such an awesome experience on the PSP. So when I saw it was added to the PlayStation Store, I immediately was like, I gotta boot up my PS5 and buy that game. And then there's also games like Killzone Liberation, Resistance Retribution. They're getting through the library pretty quickly. I'd love to see more games coming quicker, but as far as the quality of the games they've added go, I think they've been doing a much better job lately than they did at the beginning of the generation. So it's not like terrible that the PS2 emulator isn't as good as PCSX2, but like, I'm glad I know that I could just install PCSX2 on my Steam Deck and largely get a much better experience than I will on my PlayStation 5. It's a bummer, but like, I'm glad that the opportunity is there, and hopefully Sony kind of notices that people are excited about this stuff and they divert more money and resources into improving their emulator, and again, making sure that the PS3 emulator they've been working on since 2019 actually makes its way out the door sooner rather than later. Anyway, that's all I've got for you in today's video. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.